Unfortunately, one of the challenges we did have was my dad suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder. He wouldn't want to touch myself, my brother, or even my mother. Yes, we did have issues, but I had a very loving mother, and that's why one of my love languages is very much so physical touch.
What do you think kept you from being influenced by trouble, and also looking at the point at where you decided to maybe get a bit more serious with your future?
I realized that my parents were spending a lot of money on me. I knew I had to find a way to create impact to then create a financial reward for them. So my journey with Ocushield began actually whilst I was studying. I basically did some research on how artificial light from screens or lighting sources. I went through that process with just an idea of taking technology that existed in glasses and putting it directly onto a device. So I'd been doing the business from my bedroom for 3 years, and I went full time in 2018. And then from there, further on, there's a second part to that journey of where we are today.
Hey, just a quick one from me before we do head over to the conversation. Firstly, thank you so much for deciding to watch the full version of this episode. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of effort by multiple people in order to get these episodes up on YouTube for you to enjoy. So all I ask is, while you're watching, if you do find yourself loving the conversation or that you're taking something useful away from it, then please do hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, because that shows to me that this episode was delivering to you what you expected of it. Plus, the more subscribers, the higher the quality of the guests and the content that this show can deliver. That's it from me. Now over to the episode.
Dhruvin Patel, the Croydon Mark Zuckerberg, as you have been referred to.
Yes, I'm not too sure about that title, but
well, I know we're going to dive into why you may have been labeled as that, but I want to start off with just some of the accolades that could give a flavor of why that title may have come about. So you have featured in various newspaper articles, including the Evening Standard, which is where I saw that title given to you. But aside from that, you featured in Cosmopolitan, Elite Daily, USA Today, Daily Mail, Glamour UK, Refinery 29, Thrive, and very recently, in the last few months, the great achievement of receiving the King's Award for Enterprise. And you got to meet the King himself, which is, it's nothing to sweep under the carpet in terms of a level of achievement that, most people will be very proud of. What I want to ask is, before we dive into that Mark Zuckerberg element, I want to touch on the Croydon element. What do you know of the story of your previous generations that led you, and I assume your family as well, to have ended up in Croydon?
So it starts with my parents, basically. Croydon, I don't know why they chose Croydon out of the whole of the UK. Actually, I do know. there was a community of Indians that was growing in that region, and what it's like back in the 1970s when my parents actually moved to Croydon. It's, phone a friend, where are you? This is where we're at. Is it a good, can we reside here? And that was the kind of their journey. But my parents, so my mom and my dad are both Indian. My dad spent a lot of his time in Nairobi in Kenya. So a lot of East African heritage. He spent a lot of his time working there, and then, met my mum in India through an arranged marriage. And my dad's dad was actually, so my granddad, who I didn't get to meet because he passed away before I was born, he was actually involved in kind of issuing birth and death certificates. So he traveled a lot with kind of the government, let's say. And my dad used to always tell me about traveling on ships. And he's like, it used to take me like 30 days to reach another country, and we'd just be on a ship this whole time. I just find fascinating altogether. Once they had the arranged marriage, they came to the UK and decided to settle in Croydon, where they've had me and my older brother. And that's where life began for us, in Croydon in Thornton Heath.
Your older brother, who I'm also familiar with. But so with your parents' story, were they born in East Africa or India?
Both in India.
Okay. And then why did your father end up spending so much time? Like, where was that link that he had to East Africa?
So it was basically because in India at the time, there was a lot of poverty and there was a need to earn money effectively. Again, similar to the story of them coming to the UK, they had friends in East Africa where somehow they communicated with them and said, right, there's some opportunities here. So why don't you come across and, earn some money here? And that's what effectively they did.
It's amazing because, my background and one of the reasons that I'm so interested in this conversation with you is because we're both Indian by background, both raised in London. I also studied optometry for a year and then decided to jump ship or change course.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
And then we obviously went to the same university, which is where we met. But going back to that part, so looking at my own family history, when I investigated this, it's also how this podcast came about. There was one thing, which is there were Indians that went over to East Africa because it was part of the colonial movement that happened, where almost Indians were promised this, this American dream opportunity in East Africa, and they were sent across, ended up building the railways, but it wasn't quite the land they expected. There was, I think 3,500 deaths in the building of these railways. But then there were the other cohort of Indians that went across because they were following that opportunity that India didn't have at the time. So one group were kind of pushed to go there, and the other guys received the pull of the opportunity. That is an entrepreneurial mindset, right? To take that kind of risk. Mm-hmm. Is that what you see in your parents when you look back now, that they did possess a bit more of this, or, your dad at least, this risk-taking mindset to think, I see an opportunity somewhere where I don't have it here, and I'm now going to try and jump at that?
I think for my father, especially at the time, so he's the complete opposite of a risk taker.
Okay.
And for him, the reason why he ended up there was he followed his father's footsteps, and for him, his father was, effectively very, very important to him. I know he took a lot of learnings from him because he saw his father working, doing a kind of a government job and being well looked after in the time. He followed him to wherever he went and said, right, I'm going to come to East Africa with you, and do what we need to do to put food on the plate and then take it from there, really.
It's amazing. So did you get to spend much time with your dad's dad, or did you know?
No, so he passed before I was born. So unfortunately I didn't. My brother did, but yeah, I didn't get to meet him.
And what was your upbringing like?
It's difficult to answer because you look at different spectrums, right? You compare to what others have and don't have. And, if I'm to assess my upbringing now from where I'm sitting, I'd say I had a very good upbringing, right? If I look at, most people that suffer from PTSD or some form of dysfunction in their adult life, it's because they've had trauma as a child, whether it's divorced families or broken homes, or, not being able to support Maslow's hierarchy at home. But if I look back, yes, we did have issues, but I had a very, very loving mother who showed a lot of affection. And that's why one of my love languages is very much so physical touch. It's because, as you know, being brown, love is not a word that's spoken.
Yeah.
It's sometimes shown in other ways, right? Which is through physical touch or acts of service, predominantly, very much so, right? Cooking food for their children. For me, really felt that from my mother's side. And, both my mom and dad worked very hard, again, to just look after me and my brother. And I just remember all they did was they just worked. They just worked all the time. They came home, made food, and then rinse and repeat. And, we went on a handful of holidays that I can remember. In the later years, we kind of started asking me and Sam and my brother, we were like, yeah, let's go, abroad. And we started going, went to places like Dubai and India, and then also America once. But, with my parents, that's probably kind of the three regions we've been to. Other than that, we were doing, Butlins or Pontins in the UK, for example, which I loved, right? Like, it's something that I really enjoyed because, it was so fun, so much entertainment value. So yeah, in that sense, we had a really good upbringing. There were some challenges in the sense of my dad, he, again, a very typical brown father-like figure, doesn't speak about anything at all when it comes to emotions or, in terms of raising a child, in terms of direction. I think the biggest direction my dad used to give me and my brother was, one statement, which was like, always be the best, or like these really funny statements that like you just rinse and repeat again, but never said anything else. Unfortunately, one of the challenges we did have was my dad suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, we as a family, we all know he suffers from it. So his OCD is around cleanliness. So it's his personal cleanliness. So he can spend 2 to 3 hours in a bathroom both morning and night, but also how he interacts daily with, let's say, family members. He wouldn't want to touch myself, my brother, or even my mother, unless it's on his terms, right? Yeah. Like, you've had a shower, you've cleaned your hands, or, all those things. So if you imagine from a love perspective, if my mother's provided lots of physical touch, and then you've got my dad, which is slightly challenging. And, there was a period when we were young where he was also very loving, caring. We'd sit on his lap and watch TV, but then slowly that started to change because his OCD took over. So, that played a big part in, at home, my parents, they had a lot of disagreements and, it was very challenging. So, because if you imagine an arranged marriage where, again, two different people fundamentally, someone going through a mental health issue, which they don't want to accept because, again, being brown and being a male, you don't mental health issues aren't really a thing.
No,
right?
It's seen as very inferior and, almost a sign of weakness.
Yeah. So, even to this day, we can't get him to accept that he has something which is okay and we can get help or he can get help, but because he can't accept it, there's, you can't get that help. Right. But yeah, internally as a family, we had to, me and my brother had to nurture my mom and dad's relationship. We had to help them, bring them together sometimes because of the clashing at home. And that was difficult. That was the difficult parts. But as I say, overall, looking back, I think we still had a very good upbringing, compared to what else is out there in terms of the lottery, right? Of where you're born into. I think we had we were quite lucky in that sense.
Yeah. There's an element of, proactivity, or, to put it another way, there's an element of leaning into making a change into something where you see there's somewhere where you can have an influence, or somewhere where you see there's room for improvement and you want to make a change, or there is the fight and flight, you can lean out of it. It's something that Stephen Bartlett talks about a lot when it comes to leaning into a change that you see happening versus leaning out. And I think that's really something that you did with Ocushield. But before we get into that, just looking at your schooling years, what were your friendship groups like? Did you find you tended to gravitate towards people of a similar background, or, if you knew what your mindset was then to that kind of people, or was it did you almost feel like isolated in terms of the type of friends that you were quite different to them?
Yeah, so at school in Croydon, so I went to Archbishop Lanfranc and Mitcham. Predominantly 90% of the kids were either Afro-Caribbean or from an Asian background, okay. South Asian background, and then 10% were Caucasian or white, right? Which is quite the opposite of most regions in the UK. I had a lot of, my friend circle at school was very much so. I had a lot of South Asian friends, from Indians to Pakistanis to whatever else. But as well as that, had other ethnicities. But in terms of fitting in, I think, I didn't really have a problem with fitting in the sense of, at the time, in terms of mindsets, I think everyone there was there to, generally go to school. They weren't really striving for excellence. Everyone was kind of just going through the motions, and me included. I didn't really see the value in GCSEs. I knew education's important, but I remember we were doing our GCSEs and, as a friends group, we were so laxed about it. We were getting a pizza made and we were running 10 minutes late to sit an exam, and the pizza got made and we had to run down the road and we're like half an hour late for an exam. And I'm like, well, if I, one, I could have done a lot better, but two, what if I missed it completely and then didn't get a GCSE? But it's those kinds of risks that we took because we didn't put too much value on the GCSEs. And that probably shows from my poor GCSEs I get, because I got 1A, 8 Bs, 2 Cs and a U.
Wow. But this is not a message to inspire kids to underperform in GCSEs, but it shows that it's not the end of the world.
It's not, it's definitely not the end of the world. I think, but I did from then I did realize that I had, again, for my GCSEs, I didn't really study that much. And I think I had a bit of common sense. I realized that actually I have ability which allows me to understand things. And if I put effort behind it, I know I can achieve something greater. Was when I went to A levels, I was like, all right, now this is hard.
Yeah.
That's when, uni was hard, but A levels for whatever reason. And I think it was because I didn't pay too much attention as well in GCSEs, but the leap in academia, I found really challenging to that ASA level kind of road. But yeah, in terms of my friendship group, we were all very much so around making sure we had fun at school. I think fun was a big part. There was a lot of acute, I guess, danger in our school, as we call it. There was a lot of gangs in our area. So even from walking to school to walking back home, you had to navigate if you're going to be running into trouble. And if you did, it's just one of those things where it gets to a point in our school journey anyway, that you were quite accepting of it. It was like people asking you for money or trying to rough you up to say, all right, you need to give me something. Mm-hmm. And then also getting caught in the crosshair of gang violence. Whose side are you on? And you're like, no one's side. Yeah. And we had our school was interesting. We used to take students that had been expelled from other schools before, and that meant we had kids that really didn't want to be there, and they'd do things like take the head teacher's car, bring weapons into school, and all this kind of stuff. And thankfully, I didn't hang around with too many of those troublemakers. But you were around it, right? You were around it. They'd be in the same class as you. So yeah, that was kind of a flavor, give you a flavor of kind of what the school environment was like at the time.
What do you think kept you from being influenced by trouble, shall we call it, versus, and also looking at the point at where you decided to maybe get a bit more serious with your future? Was there a turning point, or what kept you from going down the avenue of not caring and focusing on the other side?
Yeah, I think it's really fine margins, and I didn't make a conscious decision. It was a subconscious thing where I realized that I was still involved with gangs indirectly because I'd be hanging out around with them. If let's say in the evening after school, I'd be hanging around those kinds of different cohorts of people who would class themselves as a gang, right? Sometimes got involved in, I'm walking down the road, but because I'm affiliated with them, two people on bikes that were the opposing gang, they were attacking us with knives in their hand, and I'm just there like trying to get out of the way, right? Yeah. But it's these kinds of acute battles that were going on at school. But for me, as I said, something in me, I realized that my parents were spending a lot of money on me to do private tuition, for example. I kept seeing how hard they worked. My mother worked or still does work at Tesco. My dad worked at Allied Carpets, so very manual, labor intensive jobs. And I always just thought, they work so hard. I want to be able to give back to them. And for me, I didn't know what it looked like, but I knew I had to find a way to create impact, to then create a financial reward for them. But yeah, it was all subconscious, but I knew that, that life of doing nothing or causing trouble, that wasn't for me back in my mind. I knew it wasn't for me. So I had to do something else.
I love that. And I love how you say that, something in you, even if it was subconscious, told you that you need to do something where you want to create an impact. And that's already quite a strong sense of self-worth or even purpose to hold. And I know, something that you said before is that I always knew that I wanted to help. Where do you think that attitude stemmed from?
If I look back at what makes me happy, what makes me smile, it's if I touch and feel, or if I'm around people and I've helped someone, there's an immense sense of gratification that I get. And it might be selfish, but I also understand, like, for me, I'm just like, there's nothing better than that feeling of helping someone. And I realized quickly that if I can do something, and that's why I went into optometry, was one, because it had the ability to help others, right? You give the gift of vision, which is, to be able to see is one of the most important things in our lives, right? Some of what I do with Ocushield is reminding people that our eyes are a true gift, and we unfortunately take them for granted until something goes wrong. We almost wake up and we're like, yeah, we can see they're working. But yeah, the fact that I saw we can help people with that was really important to me. And that's why I went into the profession, as well as that, and the ability to be entrepreneurial in that profession. I was like, right, two things that I really liked, I'm going to go ahead with pursuing something in this profession.
It's amazing. And something you mentioned about that feeling of happiness you get from helping or giving. It reminds me of Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last, if you've read it. And one of the points that he brings up is the role of oxytocin in all of this. And he gives a really simple example of, I think he was referring to himself, where he said that he saw that someone had dropped a bunch of papers, on their way across the road. So naturally, he wanted to help them pick up the papers, right? And that feeling that he got from that small act of kindness that wasn't demanded of him gave him that boost of oxytocin. The lady who was helped in the process, the feeling of being helped by someone gives her a boost of the same oxytocin. And on top of that, someone passing by who saw that act of kindness, it also gives them that same boost to then likely go on and feel more obliged to want to do the same thing for someone else. It's why we love, some of these shows where, or, a perfect example, like a Mr. Beast video, or one of those YouTubers where they've just decided to randomly give, a $400,000 tip. Maybe they're exaggerating slightly, right? But those videos do well because we love random acts of kindness, even if they're staged, because it's still the act of kindness underlying it. So I think even in what you're saying, I don't think it is it doesn't necessarily need to be framed in a selfish way, because I think there is a chemical role of why kindness leads to happiness, which ultimately leads to a longer and more fulfilling life. But, it's amazing to not only just think like that, and, from knowing you for so many years, you genuinely are like that, but to find a way to integrate that into your passion and career that makes money and helps people, it's inspiring. So let's get into Ocushield. So you, as I know, you graduated in optometry, and then to begin with, you started working as an optician?
Yeah, so my journey with Ocushield began actually whilst I was studying. So when I was studying back in 2013, 14, I basically did some research on how artificial light from screens or lighting sources affects the eye's physiology and circadian rhythm, so effectively our eye structures and sleep and wake cycle. And quickly I found that consumers, including myself, by looking at screens, I could potentially get eye strain, headaches, but also suppress melatonin, making it harder for me to have a well-rested or fall asleep and have a well-rested sleep. So me being a student using 10 screens a day, I was just like, oh, this isn't very good. And it was kind of the iPhone 3/4 era. And I thought screens are only getting bigger and brighter. And if I'm thinking like this, then something in me said, automatically, someone else will be thinking like this. So I said, let me do something about it. And, I entered into a CAS Business School competition, which was called City Spark, where they say submit an idea, and across the multiple stages, you can win some funding. And, I went through that process with just an idea of taking technology that existed in glasses for prescription glasses and putting it directly onto a device, in terms of a material that's a filter, screen filter or protector. And I went through the motions, won the grant funding. And in that 18 months of when I was going through the motions of winning that funding, I remember I took everyone's email address down that I ever met. And in January 2015, I put a Wix website up, and I said, right, let me just turn everything on for pre-order. I've created the specification. I've created the brand at the time. Was it called I Sleep Easy? That was the first name. It was a terrible name. We launched with Ocushield, and somehow I got about 1,000 pre-orders from all these people that I'd interacted with. And at that time, pre-orders and like that Kickstarter kind of stuff, that was early on. Like Kickstarter and Indiegogo came on afterwards. But the fact that, and again, emails back then, open rates were a lot higher, right? You wouldn't get spam like now you do now, right? You're just ignoring tons of emails. So I can see why people were receptive of it. And with that, had the initial funding to mass produce the first batch. And from there, just started kicking along. And I fully qualified as an optometrist in 2018. So I'd been doing the business from my bedroom for 3 years, and evenings and lunches, and from pick packing the product to customer service to whatever else. And I said, right, now I've got the opportunity to go full time on the business or open a Specsavers joint venture. Was that they were knocking on the door saying, hey, Dhruvin, do you want to open a Specsavers store? Again, coming back to impact, I said, well, with a Specsavers store, I only can test 10 or 20 patient size a day. Or even if I have a few other optometrists there, that's another 10 or 20 patients a day, right? So let's say 100. But with the business, I could impact hundreds of thousands or millions of people's eyes a day by, potentially creating products that help them with their eyes. So at that time, I said, right, I have to go with the business, Ocushield, and I went full time in 2018. And then from there, further on, there's a second part to that journey of where we are today.
And this is the bit where I find the breaking the mold of cultural norms is something that separates a lot of people who have bright ideas from the ones who go on to make a difference. There is a really interesting book called The Triple Package, and it focuses on 3 areas where there's almost a disproportionate advantage that goes to certain cultures. And normally it kind of ties in with the immigrant mindset, but where they've come from certain cultures because of the way their values and belief system is set up. I want to focus on the other aspect that it talks about, which is the downsides of it. Because, the way we're raised, and you touched on it before, there's this focus on doing well in education to get that respectable job, everything that, you were well on the path of doing. But what it also does is it almost sets this conventional ceiling where it doesn't really break above that, because a lot of the way that some of these belief systems are set up, and, coming from Asian backgrounds, it's chase that conventional signs of success, like the well-paying job in the respected lines of career, the usual, but more out of the case of we almost fear failure rather than chasing that huge upside, right? It's a way that a lot of the mindsets are driven into kids is we need to do well to not fail, and then we get to this level of success. Along that journey that you took, a lot of the time you could end up upsetting or having to challenge against people who are wondering why you're kind of breaking out this conventional route of success, because who knows what's on the other side of that door? It's not stable. Was this something that you saw you face in your early years?
When I started in my early years, I didn't. So from, I guess, questions very much so around close family and friends, and in that sense, I didn't face any objections because I was doing it with my studies and working as an optometrist. But when I made the full-time leap, I think then definitely there were some questions asked on, is this the right decision? You've just qualified, you could be earning X amount of money doing this full-time. Why have you studied this whole time to just then kind of drop it in an instance, right? So there was definitely some challenges around that. And, for me, I remember the conversation I had with myself at the time. I said, if I can grow this business and just make the same salary I do as an optometrist, I would have succeeded in what I'm trying to do. Because I wanted to create something of value that helped people, but then also if it allowed me to fulfill the financial obligations in that sense, then I would have satisfied, let's say parents, and say, right, well, I'm earning the same amount that I would be if I was working as an optometrist, which is probably what they cared about, right? So I remember that I had that conversation with myself, and I still, to this day, I use that as a very much so grounding element to myself to say, right, I'm seeing so many people to do amazing things, which is great to see, and it's inspirational, and I know there's so much more levels to grow, but also I remember the fact of actually when you started Dhruvin, the only thing that you said to yourself was you'd be happy if you were to replace that salary and you can work full time. And yeah, that allows me to remain grounded and, remember, put me in the perspective of the shoes I was in that time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, one of the things that you managed to, one of the milestones you managed to hit was to get onto Dragon's Den. What was that experience like?
It was probably one of the most challenging things I've done, because it's a really complex, show to be on, because you're not only being judged personally, but you're also being judged commercially on a business, which, so, coming back to what what was running through my mind before entering the den was, right, one, this is a great opportunity, right? But two, also, right, was our brains are very much wired to be negative mindset. Look at all the problems, look at what could go wrong. And it's very much so, right, if I go into this pitch, I trip when walking in, you'll become a meme overnight to, won't get your words out, and then you fluff the whole pitch and it affects your personal credibility and also your business credibility, right? If you've got someone that can't get the pitch out, how good is their business? And then also being ridiculed or having lots of negative feedback from the dragons would then put a down on the business. So all these things you thought of, and then also, the millions of people that will be watching this back from home, and it's something you won't be able to, I guess, get rid of because it's there in the public domain, right? So you're almost second guessing yourself, thinking, right, there's all this pressure where you have to make sure that you do a fantastic job to the best of your ability, but still you can't control the outcome because you've got 5 dragons who have their own opinion and perspective. So all of that's quite daunting. But the biggest challenge was being able to get up there and pitch in that pressure cooking environment. Because it's one take. We were in there for 1 hour, 30 minutes. You see a 10-minute version of the pitch. But yeah, you are absolutely mentally exhausted after that because you've just been having to focus for 1 hour and a half straight and questions left, right, and center. And also be cognizant of how you're standing, how you're responding to a question. How is the viewer going to see this on kind of all these subtle things are going through your mind. So managing that and executing is why I say it was probably one of the most difficult things. But now that I've gone through that process, I think back and say, now that I've done it, I know I can do anything else because that was such a pressure cooking environment for me that, I know anything in the future that gives me those feelings of nervous energy, I can go on and, hopefully smash out the park.
One thing that came out of that is you did get 2 dragons on board, but you took the decision to turn down the offer because of how well the company was growing. Was that a tough decision to make? And what do you think gave you the courage, or where do you think that courage or self-belief that you can turn down an offer that, some people may have found very difficult to do so? Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, at the time it was a difficult decision because all you can go with is your gut, which is effectively, those different complex signals your body is giving you based on all the different interactions you've had there. At the time, of course, I did not know if it was the right or wrong decision for the future. As you said, we could be working with a fantastic entrepreneur who could open doors, could help the business. But on the other side, I had to look at commercially as a business, is this the right decision? You can get very caught up in thinking like, all right, these are dragons. Everyone's going to see the show. They're going to ask, are they on board? How's it to work with them? It was me thinking more about the ego or the opinion of others rather than the business decision. From a business decision, it was very black and white to me that actually it's not the best move going with a dragon because not only did the business grow and the valuation that they would invest in was really weak or poor, but also they had some clauses which weren't very founder or management team friendly. So from a business perspective, it was the wrong decision. But if you from an ego perspective, it's like, oh yeah, I'd be able to say I can speak to Peter Jones or Tej Daly or all those kinds of things, which actually that didn't serve its purpose to grow in the business. It was more of an ego thing. So I think as I was able to separate those two bits out, the decision for me was quite easy. But of course I felt gutted afterwards, after I sent the email saying, guys, we're going to have to pull out. It doesn't work for us. You feel a bit deflated because you've gone through that whole process for 6 months of negotiating. You've done the den airing. Yeah, we turn it down and we made the right decision in the long term because we ended up raising just under £1 million from private investors at much better valuation than with the dragons. And coming back to your question around self-belief, it was just looking at it at face value, and it was a very much a black and white decision, and taking out other bits around ego in the decision. That's what allowed me to make the decision that was right for the business.
I want to lean into one of those points that you mention, which is kind of an offshoot of that bit on ego. There's a quote, and I can't remember who it's by, but it says that people will admire you when you take these kind of risks and they see you on this growth journey, because they remind you of pursuing the dreams that are similar to theirs. But people will start to resent you when you reach the top, because it reminds them of the dreams that they gave up on. As you were growing and as you had the exposure to Dragon's Den and, as I mentioned, the King's Award that you got, did you feel any of that kind of pushback from either people that you knew or people that you didn't know, where you started to see resentment creep in where you didn't expect it to come from?
Overall, I'd say no. I've kept close family and friends since starting the business, and it's quite interesting with my friends that are not in the business world or commercial world. When we meet up, it's very much so about having a good time and having a laugh, and we try not to speak too much about work because we're so busy having fun, right? Which is how I prefer it anyway. And being on this kind of business journey, you find your pockets of people to converse with and speak to about business challenges or wins because they understand it. I think in this journey, it can be really difficult if you want to speak to your friends about business, right? Because if you have someone that's in a role or job role which they don't have the highs of a business, being in a business, or even the lows of a business, it's very hard for them to console or advise on the lows, but also very hard for them to appreciate the highs, especially if you might be continuously getting highs, right? I've always very much so, spoken about business with people that understand it. And, if friends ask, then I'm happy to share. But I almost don't share on purpose because it's, I like to enjoy the bits around with friends where we can just get together and have a laugh, right? Which is fantastic. But yeah, I think in terms of resentment, to your point, it's really interesting was you do have a lot of more people supporting you in that initial period. And then once you start to get bigger and you're winning, people are like, okay, well, this person's, effectively made it. They don't need my support. Or there might be elements of what you talked about, which is resentment, where they may have given up on their own, dreams or endeavors, which, yeah, I can definitely feel a bit of that, but, no one's going to come out and say to me, right, that. But yeah, I can definitely feel a bit of that. And it makes total sense because I think every day we're battling with, our own responsibilities, our own life, and we're making decisions, do I want to pursue something that's really risky, or do I carry on doing what I'm doing, which is, I've got golden handcuffs and it's providing for me and the family, and it's difficult, right? It's difficult. And it's just one of those decisions that everyone has to either make is, which path to go on. And it's always never too late to change what path you're on, right?
Yeah, I love that. It's a very good point that it is never too late. And the journey that you've taken, everything that you've spoken about from your early childhood years through to this schooling and university, you'd have been exposed to all groups of people, people at school who didn't want to take education seriously, didn't see the value in it, like you were mentioning, and then people who decided to refocus and take it seriously. Then you go through university, and then even when you start your professional career, there would have been people who are driven at work to do well in order to get a promotion, whatever it may be, and people who kind of are just there for the ride and cruise through. And then you see people like yourself, especially as you push through to the entrepreneurial journey, who have taken that risk to break out of that steady career to do something. What do you think characteristically it takes for someone to leap through that barrier of being even hyper-focused, but in their lane, to doing what you did and maybe pushing outside the box with a risk where you don't know what's through the other side of the door?
So I think for someone just to reiterate a question, how can someone transition from somewhere where they're focused in a kind of a 9-to-5 job to something where it may be risky and something that's unknown?
Yeah. Or have you seen any specific character traits or any, even similarities in their background story that are common amongst these people who do make that leap?
Yeah, I think there's some really key characteristics, and one is just resilience. I think it's and that resilience comes from again, younger days, the childhood, I think a lot of people that have gone through resilience can make the best entrepreneurs or best change makers or do something fantastic in the adult years because they've been used to fundamentally being kicked down 100 times, right? So I think that resilience piece, and for me, I'm trying to figure out where my resilience comes from. My resilience, I'm just trying to think what I might have been kicked down on when I was younger. I can't think about what that might be, but I think I fuel the purpose of trying to, do something for my parents to make them happy and give something back. That's what pushes me forward. So, you've got either those really negative things that push you, or you've got something that's really positive and you're trying to attain, which I think mine stems from. So yeah, the resilience is one. And second is just sometimes you've got to have a little bit of, just having the blinkers on, just not caring about what's happening outside. I think when you become so focused on a goal, you then reap the rewards because things tend to fall in place like dominoes. Very much so with the business. I didn't have a business plan. I just had a goal that I wanted to create this product. And once I created that product, that's when things just started to fall in place in terms of a domino effect. And I think if you're very hyper focused about creating a product or creating some change and you just work towards it without thinking about the outside KPIs or metrics, then you can make it happen, right? And then everything else that happens on top is a bonus.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's one thing that I've heard you say, which is that when I'm one of those people that when I have an idea, I don't think too much about it. And you frame it in the context that there are pros and cons to doing that. But it's something that I admire because I think it's a massive driver in making those quick decisions or making those big decisions that some people may fear to take. And I'll have to, don't quote me on this exactly, but it's one thing that when I first heard about it, it's always stuck with me. I think it's Jeff Bezos it's a stakeholder letter that he gave in quite a while ago. It's probably like the late 90s. And he talks about the power of decision making, right? And you may have heard this, but he classes it in like type 1 decisions and type 2 decisions. Type 1 decisions are those where it can be reversed. And type 2 are ultimately those ones that are almost irreversible. And what he says that a lot of people and companies now, I think he was framing it in the context of companies, that they put a lot of weighting or they're excessively focused or hyper weighted towards the type 1 decisions, and even classing some of those type 2 as type 1, where they feel that it's irreversible and it's not. And then it kind of stunts them making that push forward. That's something where, do you think that it's something that has always been with you, where either that you're able to distinguish between these type 1s and type 2s, or you've just, you've built into your mindset that these type 2 decisions, if I take it and it doesn't go the way it's planned, it can reverse? Do you think that's always been there? And, has there been any moments that you can really recall where you thought, yeah, I was able to take a decision that I saw as a type 2. Most people may have seen it as one that's irreversible, and it wasn't, and it's either worked for me or against me.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point there. I think with a lot of what I've done in terms of business decisions, it comes back to kind of the gut and being agile, right? Being a small business or startup business, you have the ability of less stakeholders, less people's opinions to discuss with the topic about, and that allows you to move quickly. Ultimately, I hold the trigger on that, which is the beauty of innovation, right? And, I'll give you an example. Like in December last year, after kind of 12 to 18 months of work, we launched an online eye screening platform that allows employees to screen their eyes in under 7 minutes. Now, we've always been in physical products. We've never done anything digital. But after speaking to employers, like a dozen HR directors, and finding out that only 2 to 6% of employees actually get their eyes tested, I thought, wow, we all use our screens to work. So we all use our eyes to work on screens, but no one's getting their eyes tested. And that's a huge problem. And again, I had a gut feeling was saying, well, actually, we could innovate in this space. We could do something. And just from that, again, not doing any further market research or validation, we created a solution. And now it's out in the market, and we've got companies like Aon and Charles Tyrwhitt utilizing the service, right? But it comes back to, you've just got to, there's something within you that gives you that feeling to go and explore. And as you said, the worst thing that could have happened in that scenario was no one would have wanted it. And we would have been like, right, cool, we tried this, but no one wanted it. But now the upside is actually people want it, and it can cause massive growth in the business, and it's something exciting and sexy to talk about. Yeah, I think there is a time and place for different decisions. And I think definitely some decisions are bigger ones which can make a bigger impact, and they need slower times to think about it, or more time to think about it. But with most things, I think it's reversible, right? So do it quickly, test, and then turn it off if it's not working, or carry on if it is.
Yeah, I mean, he says here, I just want to quote it because he said it way better than I could, but most decisions aren't like that. They're changeable, reversible, they're two-way doors. If you've made a suboptimal type 2 decision, you don't have to live with the consequences for that long. You can reopen the door and go back through. Type 2 decisions can and should be made quickly by high judgment individuals. So like you say, it's still off the basis of knowing, what you're doing, and you have a business partner who you talk really highly of, and I'm sure you've got a great team around you. So yeah, it's a much better phrase than I did. But you mentioned some big names there, and that just puts into perspective the scale at which this is growing. And anyone that knows the business will see the kind of numbers that it's doing, and how you were able to turn away from an opportunity like Dragon's Den. And some of your investors, if I look here, Rubik's Ventures, and then you've got like ex-Balenciaga and Gucci group leader James MacArthur. I think also Jason Ellis, president of GameStop, and and Dan Martin, if people know, that is an Olympic cyclist. But the point I'm getting there is, when you start having some of these names that are backing a product that for sure you've believed in over years, and you've gone through Dragon's Den, do you ever get that feeling of, how did I end up here? And whoa, do I really know what I'm doing to have these names and these ventures backing me?
Yeah, you definitely, in my shoes, I definitely feel sometimes there is a bit of imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
You do get to, hold on, I've never been trained for this. Do I have the right skill set, or know how to manage these new stakeholders that are coming on board and supporting me with their funds and time? And you sometimes do think, and I have thought myself, right, can I do this? Am I qualified? And again, that's that kind of devil on one of the shoulders creeping in. And you've just got to look at, again, the real positives and what you've done in the journey. And, the fact that people of that caliber at the foundation of it wanted to support and invest in me, was fundamentally, they invest in businesses, but they invest in the founder. That's what the mandate is generally of investors, is they look for the person behind the company. So I've got to take that and say, right, they invested in me, so of course I can deliver what they want, right? And use that as confidence. But yeah, look, there's definitely days when you do question yourself, when things are hitting the fan, or you're not quite reaching the targets that you want to. But that's the part of the journey, which is, you go through those lows to then experience the highs. And, I always tell my partner that at the moment she asks me, are you excited for the holiday that's coming up? Are you excited for this? And I'm like, no, not yet. Ask me on the morning of that holiday, for example. And, being a founder, I've got to this point where I try not to react to the highs and lows. So I very much so keep myself on a steady line. And that might be good commercially for the business, but then I think about, is that good for me personally? Because if I can't appreciate the excitement of life, right? Was life supposed to be enjoyed? Then am I truly living? Now that's a big kind of deeper question, but it's something that has captured my attention kind of in the recent months. But it's, that's what happens in being a founder. You create these mechanisms for you to be resilient and be able to go on the trajectory that you want to go on.
So talking about that trajectory, what is the plan in the long term? What would you ultimately like to see this grow to, or your own personal path?
So with Ocushield, my ambitions are to create a leading digital eye care brand. So as everyone knows in the UK, when they think of eyes, they usually think of Specsavers. We want to change that narrative for the newer generations, right? Gen Z, gen whatever that's coming up, we want them to be able to name Ocushield as that provider for any eye care related product, but also service. And that's our grand vision. By 2025, we want to hit a target of protecting 10 million eyes. That's what me and the team are focused on, relentlessly trying to reach those many people and supporting those many people. But yeah, we fundamentally exist to let eyes thrive.
Wow, I love that. Is that a patented slogan?
I love to say it is. I don't think it is, but maybe we should trademark it.
Let's think about that. And I'd feel rude, as in I don't feel rude not to. I actually want to. I want to talk about your partner who you mentioned, because the brief things you've told me about her, you talk very, very highly of her. What role has she and does she play on keeping you in check?
So first and foremost, I think my partner, she's a fantastic human, very kind, very, very giving. I remember the point when I fell for her, I always reiterate it back to her. I said it was because I remember I came to meet her somewhere which was like 1.5 hours away from my home, and she drove also the same distance. And she said, "Oh, instead of you getting a train, I'll drop you back home." I said, "What? You want to drive an extra 1.5 hours that way and then come back on that? So it's a total 3 hours for you to get back home?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "No, definitely." And I said yes because I thought she wasn't going to do it. So I said yes, and she dropped me home. And I was like, she really is a kind, caring human being, like fundamentally. And that's what made me, one of the key reasons why it kind of cemented things for me, was like that's the kind of person I want around me, right? And she's a great individual, but her mother always says this to her is, when she saw me, she said, "Dhruvin, the only thing he wants in life is peace." And my partner brings me a lot of peace, which I think is very necessary in the kind of journey I'm on, because it's so dynamic and so demanding. The ability to have peace with your partner where it's not chaotic. If I went home to a partner which caused, undue stress, which I've had in the past, right? It just would not work. So for me, having someone that is my peace and I can enjoy my time with, and again, can keep me grounded, because she's a psychologist. So she can work with the mind in that sense as well, unpack things, even if I'm having troubles. So, call it your personal shrink in that sense. It's fantastic, right? So for me, it's quite nice and amazing that I found someone that can support me in that way, but also is a great human being.
No, it's amazing. It's exactly, I can confirm to her that is what you've told me offline as well. So you're not just saying this for the microphone and the camera.
I'll give you £5 later.
Cheers. I've just upped it actually. No, but thanks so much for everything you've shared. There's a lot that I learned about you, more than I expected to learn. But it's really clear that Ocushield has a very, very honourable founder, and there's no surprise actually that it's doing so well. So, were there any final comments that you wanted to share?
No, I think I'm good. I think, had a really good discussion. I think, thank you for asking those probing questions that can allow me to get out what's in my mind.
Anytime. And we have a closing tradition where, from previous guests, I tell them to submit questions, and then I keep a full list of them, and I take 2 that I think, these would be really good to put forward to today's guest. So if you're ready, I'll ask you the 2.
Yeah, go for it.
So question number 1 is, how do you deal with sad days?
Sad days. So one is being around my partner. I think that takes me out of any rut generally. So that's one thing. Secondly, I have to focus on myself. If I'm having sad days, I'll do something that can, change the energy. So that's, doing some exercise, for example, or doing something that makes me happy or laugh, watching comedy on YouTube, like something really stupid, but actually just watching 5 minutes of a stand-up comedian, just like,
right.
All right, breaks that cycle of, negative thoughts. And then also more recently is just maybe having a coffee. Actually, do you know what? I never used to drink coffee, but in the last 12 months I'm hooked. I was hooked on mochas because I'm a big sweet tooth, but I've started to drink a lot more coffee because that feeling it gives you you almost feel unbeatable because of that energy lift you get. And I drink a coffee here and there on in a week, so maybe a couple cups a week. But yeah, those are my kind of go-to actions to beat any sad day.
That's amazing. I love that. I feel bad that you turned down my coffee offer earlier than now.
I've had my one for today, so
fair enough,
I try not to have too many, and
keep it in check. Nice.
It's late afternoon, so that coffee might affect my sleep.
And question number 2 is, what is one thing that you've become comfortable accepting about yourself?
That I don't need to be a certain way for people. And I'll give you an example is, when I'm at an event or I'm at something, I can leave whenever I want. If I feel tired or I'm exhausted or actually I want to rest, I just, I make the conscious decision to leave on my own terms. That makes me really happy, because actually, rather than dragging something out where, you have a great time and then things drag on, and you may not want to be somewhere, but you're being there because you're being polite. But also you're not giving your full 100%. People can tell, right? If you're somewhere where you don't want to be, people can tell. So rather than causing, not being consciously there, just politely say, I'm going to head now. But yeah, so for me, it's just having the power to be able to, share that amongst, friends, family, acquaintances, and saying, right, I'm happy to make this decision, whether it's leaving an event or something else.
I love that. Thank you very much, Dhruvin. It's been a true pleasure to have you here. And well, I don't know what limit the sky is for Ocushield, but I look forward to seeing it grow. So
awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Hey, just a final quick thing from me. Firstly, thank you so much for tuning into this episode, but more so, you have my extra gratitude because you've listened right through until the end. That tells me that you found something useful or valuable in this conversation that meant it was worth listening to. If you haven't done so already, please do hit that subscribe button so that I know that this was a good episode and so that I can bring you more of the same with bigger and better guests. And with your follows and your reviews, that's going to help me do just that. That's all from me, and I really look forward to seeing you on the next episode.